I've always been someone who uses humor to cope with tough situations. You know that friend who's always joking around about everything, even serious stuff? That's me. Not necessarily because I'm funny, but because it's a mechanism my brain uses to protect itself. However, the story I'm about to tell you, which happened about 6 months ago, shook me so deeply that it's been hard for me to make jokes ever since. Growing up, making jokes about everything and nothing at all eventually becomes part of your DNA, and you start to refine your jokes, making them better over time. When I reached adulthood and processed all this, I realized I might actually be a funny person. About 1.5 years ago, I created a comedy YouTube channel. It's not a huge channel, but it's big enough to make me feel happy and motivated to keep going. The problem is that after what happened to me, it's been hard to come up with new stories. Sharing this with you is, in a way, a cry for help. Let me explain better before I tell you what happened. Since I have a comedy channel, I didn't share my experience with my followers because I was afraid it would tarnish what I'd built. I could have shared it if I'd found it funny at any point. But as I said, it marked me so much that I've felt blocked ever since and don't know if I should share it with my audience. I'll let you be the judges of that. Besides being a YouTuber, one of my favorite things to do is hiking and camping. Normally, I do it with friends or family, but the truth is, I love doing it alone, or rather, I used to. At this point, I'm not sure if I can do it again. About 6 months ago, I took a short vacation to go camping. Initially, I was going with one of my best friends. I wanted to record some content for the channel, and it's always more fun and easier to do it with someone else. But he got sick, so I ended up going alone. The trip was planned for a trail in Utah, but since he couldn't join me for the road trip, I decided to do something closer to home. I'd never camped at Devil's Path in the Catskills, New York, mainly because it's mostly prohibited in many areas and it's a challenging trail. But since I wasn't going to film any content, just explore and maybe stay 1 or 2 nights, I decided to go. The hike was demanding, especially if you're not used to exercising and hiking. The dangers are immense for those who do it alone, so I always feel like I'm on high alert. I'd been walking for about 2.5 hours when I heard a noise nearby. I can't define how close, but I know it was close enough to give me chills. I looked around, thinking it could be an animal or maybe a person. I don't know why. But when it starts to get dark, I'd rather encounter animals than people. People are often creepy, and you never know what to expect from the other side. Besides, they can be pretty twisted. I didn't see anything around, so I decided to keep going. I know it seems like an insignificant detail, but the truth is, it's not. Now that I think about it, even at that point, when nothing had happened yet, I already felt slightly uncomfortable. Our body has ways of warning us that we often don't recognize. So, I'd been walking for about 30 minutes in an unmarked part of the trail when I came across something creepy. A chain was nailed to one of the rocks. The chain didn't have anything attached to it and looked old. But what truly scared me was the rock the chain was nailed to. It was completely covered in writing. Every little piece of rock had text on it. Some words were readable, and some sentences too. But they were things that made no sense. Random, like they'd been written by someone completely out of their mind. I don't know what made me do what I did next, but I picked up the chain and tried it around my neck. The size was perfect for a human neck. I don't know what led me to do that. I feel like I acted purely on instinct. But as soon as I realized the size was exactly right, I felt completely frozen, and a horrible sensation ran through me. I felt like I'd found something truly sinister, much more sinister than I ever thought. I hurried out of there and considered turning back, but I was already deep into the trail and felt it was best to completely ignore that and keep going. Later, when I had a signal, I'd report it to the police. That's when I started noticing small details. I was clearly more alert, and everything made me jump and look back. Some food wrappers, a a completely torn sleeping bag, like it had been ravaged by an animal. Then I saw what perhaps to this day intrigues and terrifies me the most. In one of the areas of the trail, shortly after finding the food wrappers and the sleeping bag, there was a doll's head with its eyes gouged out. I approached it, always looking around and checking if anyone was watching me. I wanted to disappear from there, but I couldn't just turn around and leave. I wanted to know what it was. I got closer to the doll and noticed that inside the head, stuffed into the eye sockets, was a rolled-up piece of paper. I pulled it out and saw a photograph. I couldn't even tell if it was a woman or a man, because it was so worn and old, but it looked like a woman. The back of the photo was again completely filled with text, but this time, it wasn't incoherent. It was a story about a woman who turned into a doll. I couldn't tell if it was a metaphor or not, but the idea terrified me even more. Then I realized it wasn't just a head, but an entire doll buried with only its head sticking out. At that moment, I heard a noise behind me, and I didn't even look back. I just started running as fast as I could. When I finally felt safe, I stopped to catch my breath. I felt like I was far from where I'd found those things, and that no one had followed me, but at the same time, I felt watched. I still had a few hours until nightfall, and going back wasn't an option. I'd have to camp around there, but far enough to feel somewhat safe, and I needed to find the main trail. After 3 hours of walking at a fast pace, I finally found the main trail and felt a bit more confident. The next step was to find a good spot to set up camp, ideally a sheltered area. After a while, I came across the junction of the trail to Hunter Mountain and decided to stay on Devil's Path. I knew that further ahead, I'd find a shelter known as Devil's Acre Lean-To, with a latrine behind it. It would be the perfect place to spend the night. I felt more sheltered and had walked several miles since I'd seen those objects. I prepared a meal and felt myself relax a bit. But those objects wouldn't leave my mind. I knew the trail was monitored by rangers and that those objects were old, possibly there for at least a year. The rangers were mainly looking for people violating the 150-foot rule regarding legal camping spots, and I knew they often did night patrols in that area too. How hadn't they seen those objects? Was it because they were completely off the trail? Even so, it seemed very unlikely. I was thinking about this when it started to rain. At this point, it was completely dark, and I was in the middle of unzipping my pants when I saw the outline of a man. I was sure it was a man. It wasn't that dark that I couldn't see the silhouette, and I smelled tobacco. I got chills from head to toe. I asked him what he wanted, but got no response. At this point, I was completely panicking, and all possibilities were running through my mind. If I hadn't seen those objects before, I probably would have assumed it was just someone else doing the trail like me. But after what I'd seen, everything was a potential threat. The fact that he didn't respond alarmed me. I told him to disappear and that I was armed. It was a lie. I only had a knife with me, but it was enough to defend myself in an extreme case. I quickly went back to where I had my things and grabbed the knife. I asked him again what he was doing there, and shouted more aggressively that I had no problem using the weapon. I can't define how much time passed. Emotionally, it felt like an eternity, but in reality, it must have been just a few minutes when he responded, "You've been messing with my toys." I can't even convey what I felt at that moment. The panic was total, and all my instincts were on high alert. I should have turned back while I still could. I should have come more prepared. I should. I felt my brain spinning. I wasn't prepared for this. The man was probably a psychopath. It was probably a person chained to that rock. I had to do my best, or that night would end very badly. Without thinking twice, I bent down, picked up one of the flashlights, and threw it at the man's head. He fell, probably caught off guard, which gave me time to jump on him and bang his head on the ground. He was completely stretched out, and I took off running. It was dark. I didn't know which way to go, but I just ran and ran. Fortunately, I found my way back to the trail, and by morning, I was back at the car. I immediately called the police and reported what had happened to me. Initially, they completely dismissed me, almost insinuating I was high and didn't know what I was talking about. My speech probably wasn't the most coherent. I was panicking and disoriented with everything. I spent the whole night in stress, fearing for my life. But when I told them I'd hit the man and left him unconscious on the ground, they started taking me seriously. They probably thought I'd killed him. I also thought about that and was obviously worried. But I was fighting for my life. I felt I'd encountered someone capable of anything, and the way he said I'd been messing with his toys was so alarming that my body just went into survival mode. After a while, they arrived. They took my eyewitness account and told me I'd be notified. Later, I learned they found the rock I mentioned but never found the man, nor the doll or the photograph I found. I haven't heard anything else since, and when I contacted the police recently, they told me the investigation is still ongoing. From what I've been able to gather, there was no alert or warning. The trail wasn't closed for investigation, but I hope to find out more. I feel like I need answers to move on with my life and forget, at least a little, what happened to me. Since then, I've avoided going hiking alone. I feel like my safety has been compromised and that I can't trust the unknown like before. I still wonder what was true in the story I found written, who the man was, and what his true purpose was there. I try to deal with the trauma, but every time I close my eyes, I see that man's silhouette and hear his voice. Everything happened in the summer of 1999 when I was 13 years old. I had always been a more solitary child, and because of that, people often saw my shyness as a weakness. At that time, I didn't have the self-awareness I have today, so I also viewed my shyness as a sign of inferiority. Whenever someone called me weak for doing something, the next day I would be doing the opposite, even if it went against my values. This constant acceptance of others' rules stayed with me for many years, and fueled everything that happened to me. That year, I had switched schools. My new classmates didn't know me, so I felt it was the perfect time to be someone I wasn't. I wanted to be cool, to be a bully just for the sake of it, mainly to avoid being bullied myself. Sometimes I became one, and that's something I'm ashamed of to this day. In the area where I lived, it was a tradition to have a medieval fair in July. It was one of the city's biggest events, and everyone gathered there. I was terrified of running into someone from my old school, so I decided to suggest to my new group that we play a prank on some of the younger kids. We'd tell our parents we were going to the fair, but soon after, we'd head to the forest surrounding the area. I don't even remember what exactly my plan was. My brain tends to erase traumatic memories to protect itself, but I know it involved wearing masks and scaring the younger kids. Each of us chose a mask, hid it in our backpack, and only put it on in the forest where the younger kids couldn't see us. Everything went as planned for the first hour. The younger boys were completely terrified. I remember one of them couldn't stop crying, and I just wanted to cry with him. I felt guilty and knew exactly what he was going through because I had been through it myself. But I couldn't say anything. The group would immediately see it as a weakness. Sometimes I think about how wrong and cruel we are as a society, and how we pass that on to our children. But that's a discussion for another time. As I was saying, we had been in the forest for about an hour when we heard a strange noise. We immediately started looking at each other, and I, afraid of missing the opportunity, volunteered to check it out. I had been walking for 5 minutes when I realized I was completely alone and lost in the forest. The others had left me there. I didn't know which way to go. I could hear people at the fair in the distance, but I felt too deep in the forest, and the sounds seemed to come from all directions. At the same time, it was very faint. The trees around me created a barrier. That's when I heard what sounded like voices closer by. I didn't know whether to feel relieved that I was near the medieval fair or terrified because I was alone in the forest with strangers. I cautiously approached, constantly looking around. Then I saw them. A group of people, all standing in a circle, wearing masks. I was far away, so at first I couldn't make out what kind of masks they were. But then I realized they were pig masks. It terrified me. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. I had come to the forest to scare others, and now I was the one being scared. I couldn't tell what they were doing, but there was clearly something in the middle of that circle. To this day, I wonder what it was. I knew I had to get out of there as quickly as possible. I turned around and was about to walk in the opposite direction when I heard one of them say, "Hey kid, why are you leaving so soon? If you join us, we have a surprise for you." I was even more terrified. How did they know I was there? And how did they know I was just a kid? I started running as fast as I could, this time not caring about making noise. I knew they were chasing me. I could hear them running. I had never been so scared in my life. I knew I couldn't get caught, or something terrible would happen to me. When I was on the verge of exhaustion and desperation, I realized I was almost back at the fair. I had run in the right direction. At this point, I didn't know if they were still behind me. I had lost touch with reality around me. I was just running for my life. As soon as I reached the fair, I ran straight to the police and started yelling about what had happened. They called my parents and investigated what I had said, but they never found anything. My parents punished me and even suggested that I was lying, that it was all a childish prank and that I just wanted attention. A week later, I found a note on my bed that said, "We know where you live and have sat where you sleep. If you speak up again, you'll be the one in the center of the circle." I never spoke about it to anyone again. But today, I'm old enough to stop being afraid and finally talk. Last month, I went back to my parents' house. My father had a stroke, and I needed to help my mother organize everything. I had been there for a week when it was time to organize the attic, and I came across a chest full of old photos. I never liked looking at pictures from my childhood. It hadn't been unhappy, but it hadn't been happy either. I liked myself much better as an adult than as a child or teenager. Amid all that, I found some photos taken at the medieval fair in 1999. I froze for a moment, but then I started compulsively looking at them one by one. Finally, in one of them, I found what I had been looking for all these years. Leaning against a post was my neighbor from across the street, holding a pig mask. It had been him all along. Someone I trusted. Someone who had been in my house many times. I was furious. I started piecing everything together. For some reason, that man had always made me uncomfortable. The way he watched me, how he talked to me, how he placed his hands on my shoulders. I remember perfectly one day when I was coming home from school, and he offered me a ride. I refused, saying my mother was on her way, and he said my mother had asked him to pick me up. I must have been about 9 years old then. I was about to get in the car when I saw my mother approaching in the distance. I never told my mother about it. I knew how my parents were, and they probably wouldn't have believed me. Besides, I was just a kid and didn't fully understand the dangers. That interaction didn't alarm me at the time, but now, everything fell into place. That photo was the missing piece of the puzzle that had been forming in my mind for years. I filed a report about 2 weeks ago, around the same time I found the photograph, and I haven't heard anything since. But I won't go back home until I get to the bottom of this.